Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining this Pennsylvania School Boards Association webinar designed for those considering a run for their local school board. With the next general school board election scheduled for November of this year, now is the time to evaluate whether running is the right choice for you, as deadlines for nominating petitions and other candidacy requirements are approaching. The purpose of this webinar is not to provide a step-by-step guide to running for school board. Such information can be obtained from your county board of elections. Instead, this webinar aims to review the role of school boards and school board directors in Pennsylvania, offering a comprehensive overview of the major tasks and responsibilities you will undertake if you decide to run and are elected to your local school board. Before we dive into the roles and responsibilities of school boards and school board directors, I would like to provide some background information about the Pennsylvania School Boards Association. Established in 1895, PSBA is a private, nonprofit membership association dedicated to serving Pennsylvania's school board directors. The state's 4,500 school board directors become members through their district's membership upon their election or appointment to the board, as the school board joins PSBA membership collectively. To further demonstrate the work we do here at PSBA, I would now like to share this video. Okay, now that we're familiar with the work of PSBA, let's outline the objectives for tonight's webinar. In the first hour, we'll discuss the role of school boards in supporting the operation of their school districts by covering the following key topics: school board governance, school law, school board policy, and school finance. Each topic will be presented by a different speaker who will have approximately 10 minutes to present and 5 minutes to answer questions. The final 30 minutes will feature a panel discussion with two experienced former school board directors. They will share their real-world experiences of serving on a school board, including best practices and common pitfalls. Please feel free to use the Q&A box to submit your questions throughout the webinar. You should be able to view the submitted questions to avoid duplicates, and please note that you may need to refresh periodically to see new questions by selecting new posts or using the blue up and down arrows in the top right corner once the Q&A box is open. Okay, now it's time to introduce tonight's speakers. Well, hey everyone, my name is Will Smeltzer. I'll be guiding you through the first topic on school board governance. Following my presentation, we'll hear from Carmen Bloom, PSBA's Chief Legal Officer, who will provide essential guidance on school law. Next, Davelyn Smeltzer, PSBA's Senior Director of Policy Services, will offer an overview of school board policy. And Dr. Saitha Gwines, PSBA's Director of Professional Development, will share valuable insights into school finance. We'll then welcome PSBA consultants and former school board directors Roberta Marcus and Tina Valletto to engage in a panel discussion sharing their expertise and experience in school board service. Again, please place any questions you may have throughout tonight's webinar in the Q&A box for our speakers to address. Okay, let's get started with our first topic, school board governance. And before we start, I see somebody has a question about will this session be posted? We will be providing a recording of this webinar on greatpaschools.com, the How to Run for School Board webpage. And we'll provide a link to that webpage as well in the follow-up email that everyone will receive following tonight's webinar. So thank you for that question. We are recording, and a recording will be made available. All right, let's get started with school board governance. And we'll start with answering this question. What is a school board? A school board serves as the governing authority of a school district, elected by its citizens, and is responsible for overseeing the district's operations and taking official actions as mandated by federal and state laws, regulations, and local board policies. In accordance with the Constitution of Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania General Assembly grants each public school board the authority to maintain and support a comprehensive and efficient system of public education. The Public School Code of 1949, commonly known as the PA School Code, is the primary statutory law that governs nearly every aspect of public school operations, including the organization and general powers of school boards. And this law does not bestow any power or authority upon individual school board directors to act independently solely by virtue of their election to the board. The board's authority is exercised collectively through the decisions made by the entire entity acting as a governing body, as the law confers power and authority only to the collective board. Consequently, school boards are more effective when they collaborate as a governance team to support public education within their communities, along with the district superintendent, who by law has a seat on the school board, a right to speak on all matters, but not a right to vote. In Pennsylvania, we refer to the superintendent as the 10th non-voting member of a school board. For the successful operation of any school district, the board should collaborate and work in harmony with the superintendent to lead the district. The board's job is to govern, and while the superintendent does have a seat on the board, they are mainly responsible for the day-to-day management of district operations and are responsible for implementing the decisions and directives of the school board across the district. To ensure accountability and to comply with law regulations in the PA School Code, the board annually conducts a performance assessment of the district superintendent. It is important to recognize the differences between the role of the school board and the role of the superintendent as they work together, and this chart highlights certain responsibilities each serve within their roles. A school board concentrates on the overarching strategic direction of the district, focusing on its mission, vision, goals, budget, and policies. The superintendent supports the board's governance efforts by making recommendations and providing guidance. Subsequently, the superintendent implements the board's directives and decisions in the district's day-to-day management, including the execution of goals, budget, and policies. Now let's discuss board officers. Each public school board in Pennsylvania is required by law to elect a president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary. The board president is the leader of the board and sets the tone for how it will function. They preside over board meetings and maintain order through the voice of the gavel. It is the duty of the president to engage in planning and organization and to ensure the work of the board is accomplished. The president serves as facilitator, guiding the board through the decision-making process. The board president has the key role of serving as a bridge between the superintendent and the board. The superintendent and the board president oftentimes work together to plan agendas, and the president ensures the board receives the appropriate information to make informed decisions. It is equally important for the president to assist the superintendent by anticipating potential issues and calling special meetings when necessary. The president serves as a coach to motivate the board, provides advice when necessary, and gently educates school directors when they may make mistakes along the way. The vice president works closely with the president and chairs board meetings in the president's absence. The PA School Code does not grant much authority to the vice president, and many districts have adopted additional responsibilities for this position within their school board. The PA School Code does assign numerous duties to the board treasurer. However, the treasurer's role has changed drastically since the PA School Code was passed in 1949. Treasurers no longer make deposits or pay district bills. Instead, business managers within each school district ensure all financial functions are appropriately addressed in the district. Most school board treasurers serve in a financial oversight role by reviewing all monthly financial reports to the board, the accounts payable, and the annual budget. In districts that have budget committees, the treasurer often serves as committee chair. And lastly, the PA School Code states that the board secretary shall have general supervision of all business affairs of the school district, subject to the instruction and direction of the school board. The board secretary's duties include maintaining proper records of all board proceedings and paying bills after approval from the board, among other responsibilities. In regard to responsibilities, to assist school boards in focusing on their important responsibilities as district leaders, PSBA has developed this governance framework called the Principles for Governance and Leadership. While these principles are not mandated by law, they are designed to reflect the goals, ideals, and responsibilities inherent in the laws and regulations governing school districts and school boards. Serving as a guide and roadmap for effective governance, the principles also provide a standard against which school boards and their members can hold themselves accountable. Pennsylvania school boards are committed to providing every student the opportunity to grow and achieve. The actions taken as elected and appointed board directors ultimately have both short and long-term impact in the classroom and throughout the district. Therefore, school boards which adopt this governance framework pledge that they will lead responsibly, act ethically, plan thoughtfully, evaluate continuously, communicate clearly, advocate earnestly, and govern effectively. To review this framework in depth, please visit psba.org, and we'll also include a link to this framework in the follow-up to tonight's webinar. As we approach the conclusion of my presentation on school board governance, I would like to encourage each of you to review your district's publicly accessible board policy manual, typically available on your district's website. While the manual contains numerous policies, I recommend reviewing the 000 local board procedures section. This section provides guidance into the operations and functions of your local school board and encompasses much of the information I have shared with you tonight. And lastly, as I wrap up my time here, I want to share this quote with you. Your work as a school board member or superintendent is based on human relations, working as a team. In Pennsylvania, we refer to a school board as the team of 10, 9 locally elected school board directors working cooperatively and collaboratively with their district superintendent. With clear roles, the school board serves a role in governance, keeping its eyes on the big picture, strategic direction of the district with the help of the superintendent as the 10th non-voting member, while the district administration and staff led by the superintendent focus on the day-to-day management of the district. And then toward a common goal, each school board should focus on the overall goal of providing the best education to all district students, providing opportunities for student achievement, growth, and success. Specifically, boards should collaborate with the superintendent in working together towards the current goals and objectives outlined for the district. So I thank you for joining tonight's webinar. That's my time on school board governance. If you have any questions, I'll pause here. You can go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. And if you have any questions on governance throughout the webinar, don't hesitate to put them in the Q&A box. But hey, I'm not a dentist. I'm not going to pull teeth. Again, if you have questions, submit them whenever they come to mind. At this point, we're going to move forward in tonight's webinar. And now it's time for school law. So I introduce you to Carmen Bloom, PSBA's Chief Legal Officer, and she'll take us through school law. Carmen, they're all yours.
Thank you, Will. I hope you all caught Will's pun. All right, we're going to take a little bit of an overview of the primary school law issues that you may face as a school board director. We'll start with the Pennsylvania Sunshine Act. All right, so if you're interested in school board service, you probably are familiar with the Sunshine Act. These are some of the main requirements. The Sunshine Act is all about transparency. So we want open meetings. We want everything that the school board is doing to take place in the sunshine. Our meetings are advertised in advance so the citizenry can know what's going on. Our agendas are posted in advance. And in order to take official action, such as passing policies or approving budgets, things like that, you have to have a quorum or the 5 of your 9 school board directors in order to take the official action under the Sunshine Act. All of the deliberation would also take place in a public meeting. So although some conversations may take place in executive session, which we'll discuss in a moment, the actual official action would take place on the record in front of the citizenry at a meeting. Also under the Sunshine Act, school boards must allow time for public comment. And this would be the opportunity for taxpayers and residents of the district to be able to speak to the board about matters that come before it. Most school boards in Pennsylvania, those who follow the PSBA policy services guidelines, use what's called policy 903. So if you want information on the public comment period, you can check that out. And ultimately, most school boards set some regulations relative to public comment. So things could be the amount of time that someone would speak on the record about a subject area, or at what point in time in the meeting the public comment might be offered. As I mentioned earlier, the Sunshine Act also references executive session. So there are some issues that have to be talked about in private, and these issues are outlined in law. They're outlined in the Sunshine Act itself and also in the school code. These issues would include labor relations, personnel, confidential information, safety and security, litigation, or real estate. So things like, in terms of confidential information, what could that be? If you're talking about an expulsion of a student, for example, that wouldn't be something that you would discuss in an open meeting. That would take place behind closed doors, and the information that would actually be public would be highly respectful of the confidential information with students. That could also include if there's staffing issues, if a teacher needed to take medical leave for some reason, or there's some type of disciplinary matter relative to a teacher, these things would take place behind closed doors. That would fit your personnel exception. And so if you've ever been to a school board meeting where there is an executive session announced, that would take place either before the executive session or directly after the executive session. There would be some type of announcement on the record as to the content of that executive session, which gives the public some understanding as to what had taken place behind closed doors. Ultimately, a solicitor's guidance is extremely important in being able to identify what information would go on the record, because not everything can be discussed in public. We also wanted to discuss with you the Public Official and Employee Ethics Act, which is generally just called the Ethics Act in short. And if you're considering a run for school board, you should familiarize yourself with this, because this affects you as an individual, as a school board director. So the Ethics Act prohibits conflicts of interest. It prohibits a public official from voting on something in which they can receive a pecuniary benefit. It also requires you to fill out your statement of financial interests. So this form is somewhat like your tax form. It relates to the prior year, and you have to disclose your sources of income over $1,300. You disclose what types of relationships you have, which could affect your service as a public official. And ultimately, as a school board director, you have an obligation to engage in votes that are unaffected by your personal biases. So whether or not you believe that you have a bias, the Ethics Act would prohibit you from acting in favor of or against something if you have a connection where you could be perceived as having a benefit from that vote. Now, something I wanted to let you all know about in the limited time that I have with you is that the Ethics Commission offers the opportunity for school board directors to obtain advisory opinions. So if you are unsure, if you are on your school board, as to whether you can vote on a certain topic area, you can reach out to the Ethics Commission detail the issues you're concerned about, and they can give you guidance as to whether you can vote on something or not. They generally ask for about 21 days of lead time. However, if you do receive an advisory opinion, this can act as protection in case there is an investigation against you relative to your votes on school board. Another way to protect yourself or to help guide you through the Ethics Act obligations is to contact the solicitor and obtain an opinion in writing from the school district solicitor. Ultimately, as the slide identifies here, the Ethics Act has prohibitions on accepting honorariums, awarding certain contracts, things like that. And you can learn more about this all at ethics.pa.gov. A favorite for many school board directors recently has been to learn about the right to know law. This is the law which allows citizens to request government records. I consider the right to know law like a sister law to the Sunshine Act. They're both about transparency. So the right to know law requires that each district or agency is required to have an open records officer. This is the person to whom right to know law requests would be directed. It's the person who responds on behalf of the district. And ultimately, districts must provide public records when they're requested or prove why a record should not be released. And this might mean that as a school board director, you may have to provide records in your own possession from your own personal devices. There are appeals every single day issued by the Office for Open Records, and I read these opinions. My colleagues here at PSBA read these opinions. And what you should know as a candidate for office is to know that when you are discussing school board business as a school board director, your conversations could be subject to a right to know law request. Now, the extent of what could be subject is something that's very fact specific, and you would have to reach out to your school district solicitor to identify if a records request is made, whether you have something that you must turn over. I can't provide that legal advice to you, but it is something that you should be aware of. A subject area that has been of recent note to many school board directors is social media. And this actually has become a subject area of interest on the national stage as well. The U.S. Supreme Court has recently addressed cases relative to school board directors' statements online as candidates and then as they become elected officials. And PSBA provides guidance on this to our members. If we have the opportunity to serve you as our member, we'd be happy to continue to provide information on this topic area. So I referenced the school solicitor. If you're not currently a school board director, this might be completely unknown to you. Your school solicitor is an attorney who is hired by the board to represent the district. The school solicitor does not represent the superintendent. The school solicitor does not represent individual school board directors. As an attorney, the school solicitor represents the client, which is the district. So a school solicitor may have a variety of duties depending on the agreement with the district. Some solicitors attend meetings. They might be there for every single meeting. They might be there for special meetings. Solicitors will often review proposed board policies to make sure that they align with local needs. Solicitors will also review contracts and legal documents on behalf of the district. They will advise on employee and student discipline matters for many districts. And they can also discuss pending litigation in executive session, providing you legal advice. And of course, they can give general advice to ensure compliance. The solicitor is someone who can be a great asset to the school districts and can help minimize risk as a school director. I think I am almost to the end of my time. So are there any questions relative to the laws we talked about? Sunshine Act, Ethics Act, the role of the solicitor, and right to know law?
Hey, Carmen, I don't see anything in the Q&A, but if you have questions, don't hesitate to submit them via the Q&A box. But I'm just wondering, for those who are considering a run for school board, what is the biggest lesson or the hardest lesson for new school directors to learn around aspects of school law?
That there's a lot, Will. One of the things that I love so much about my job is that I get to read about these issues all day long so that our members don't have to. so that when our members call in and ask for support, I can quickly guide them to the right resources, save them time. There are a lot of legal considerations that affect school board service. And with that in mind, it's always so impressive to me that school directors are doing this job, taking note of all these different legal obligations without payment. I think it's an extraordinary opportunity to serve, and I'm always so impressed by our membership. I love being able to learn about these laws and share more and more information every day.
Carmen, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your expertise in school law.
Sure.
And you can have a great night. We're going to move on to our next presentation. Thank you, Carmen.
Take care, everybody.
Now we're going to move on to board policy. And now I welcome our Senior Director of Policy Services, Davelyn Smeltzer. She's not my wife. She's not my sister. She's not my cousin, but we are part of the PSBA family. And she's your presenter on board policy. Davelyn, I'll toss it to you.
Thank you, Will. You're right. We're not related, but it would be my pleasure, just to let you know. So thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight for the board policy presentation. If you're just tuning in, and to learn more about what it is to actually serve as a school director on a school board. And moving on, what I can say when we start to look at board policy is, I think I really enjoy board policy. I've been doing this for a very long time, and you may not enjoy it. However, as a school board member, this is one of your most important responsibilities of being on the board, is adopting board policy, because it guides the administrative decisions and influences all aspects of the school system, from special education to student enrollment and the structure of a board meeting to the physical maintenance of the school buildings. What do we mean when we talk about board policy? Although you may hear the term policy broadly used to reference different guidance documents at the state and federal levels of government, or to describe plans or proposals, that's not what we're talking about here today. What we're talking about here today are the board's official governing documents, and the documents that have been voted on and approved by your board. Your board policies are a sequence of documents that clearly address specific issues and areas such as student programs and district operations, everything from documents specifying what your board voting requirements are, to the student discipline policy, to budget advertisement and approval, and school district records management. Board policies are a series of documents that are the board's official governing documents, and they have school boards actually have an ethical and legal duty to adopt policies. Sections 407 and 510, excuse me, Will had mentioned about the Pennsylvania Public School Code, and those are the local laws in Pennsylvania that guide the laws that the school board needs to follow, as well as other state and federal laws. But in Pennsylvania, the Public School Code, sections 407 and 510 are what give the school boards the authority to actually adopt and enforce reasonable rules and regulations for the governance of the board and the operation of the school district. And that's generally accomplished through your board policy, through the adoption of board policy. Board policies dictate the big picture of what's to happen in the district. And to tackle that job, there are many board policies, as Will had mentioned. In fact, most school district policy manuals have over 250 policy documents. And these are organized in a certain manner if you're in PSBA's policy system. So when you're looking at your school district's policy manual, Will had mentioned that 000 local board procedures policy section. That's something that you want to look at when you're looking at your school board service, because that will tell you how the school board functions, how the meetings are run, what are the membership requirements, and so forth. Then we have a 100 section that is the program section of the policy manual. And that section runs through everything from your home education programs to your gifted education programs. Then we move on to the 200 section, which is the student-related section, and that addresses everything from enrollment, excuse me, to attendance, to controlled substances. 300 is your employee section, and we have all employees in one policy section now. So that addresses everything from your evaluation of staff, evaluation of the superintendent, to hiring and employment, and to benefits as well. Then we jump to the 600 finance section because we do have all employees in one section now. So the 600 finance section is going to cover, your taxing within the district. It's going to cover your federal fiscal responsibilities. And then we have the 700 section, which is your property section. If somebody's looking to use your school facilities, they would look in that for policy 707, that is in the 700 section. There's also a policy on maintenance of school buildings in the 700 section. The 800 section is our operations section, so that's really all encompassing. And in the 800 section, you would have maybe a school organization policy stating how your schools are organized. You would have your transportation policies and your food services policies in that 800 section. And then the 900 section is our community section. So you can see in the community section, that is your relations with parents and families, relations with other educational institutions. As Carmen had mentioned, your policy 903, how do you participate and comment in board meetings? So hopefully you can see that the school board policy manual really addresses virtually every aspect of your school district operations. And hopefully you've looked at that. Feel free to give me a thumbs up in the chat box or the Q&A if you've taken a look. And if you have not yet looked at your board policy manual, I do recommend that you take some time to go ahead and do that. Great, I'm seeing some thumbs up, so fantastic. You're already starting the job, that's great. Lots of thumbs up. Okay, I feel like I'm amongst my people that like policy, that's great. So what's in a board policy? Board policies are written both to comply with law and regulation and to clearly communicate board directives to students, staff, families, and the community. The language should be concise and readable by most of the school community. So remember that your board policies are also read by your students and families with all education levels. They have to be very clearly understood. When we draft policies, we try to remove as much legalese as possible, and we try to make them as concise as possible. However, there are always exceptions to those rules because there's some legislation that requires more content to be in policy than others. But we do structure policies in a very organized manner to try and communicate the information clearly to our membership. And one of the first sections that you will see is the purpose section. This explains the importance of the policy. And you want to have policies in your manual that provide value. We have gone throughout the years at PSBA and removed some policies that, are either obsolete, use of fax machines, or just that don't add value. And we're constantly adding policies as well, because as we stay on top of state and federal laws and regulations, there is a need to do that. So really, why is the policy important to your district is a question that you need to ask. The authority statement, this section outlines the board's authority for adopting policy on the subject and what specifically the board is directing. This section often most closely reflects many legal requirements and includes citations to applicable laws and regulations and even cross-references to other policies itself. But this is where you're going to see, if you're looking in your policy manual right now, as we speak, you'll see the footnotes at the end of the paragraphs. They're in brackets. If you click on that bracket, the law will come up for you. And that's really important to look at as you're adopting those policies, because sometimes the language is written in a certain way that you will understand it is required to be that way in the policy. Okay, definitions. We do define relevant legal terms in policies, and then there are other policies that require additional definitions. So we have the controlled substances policy, policy 227, and the courts have decided that if you are going to discipline a student for being under the influence of a controlled substance, you have to define what that means, what is meant by being under the influence. So we go ahead and add that into the policy for you. So you will find relevant definitions in the policy. Delegation of responsibility describes who will implement the board policy, and ultimately this is typically the superintendent or designee. In other policies, you will find other responsibilities. So in that 600 finance section, primarily you may see the business manager as being responsible for that. And in policy 113, which is our special education policy, you'll probably see most of the responsibility being directed to the director of special education in the district. Guidelines, we do include broad, high-level guidelines in the policy that provide direction from the board. So unless the law requires more, we do try to keep this at a board governance level. So you will see guidelines, but they won't be precise details and directives. So moving on, we'll talk about the types of board policies. And at PSBA, we do categorize the policies into 3 different areas. First of all is mandated by law and regulation. So this reflects a policy that in the actual statute, it says the board will or shall adopt a policy. And so we do that. And we let you know whether the policy is a mandated policy, whether it's a policy that is for legal liability or audit purposes. And what that means is that it doesn't necessarily say in the statute that a policy is required. However, if the district does not have that policy in place, then they're at risk. And they're also putting their whole school community at risk sometimes. So in terms of special education, you see this in students with disabilities. That is one of the most highly litigated areas of education. And it's a very complex piece of law. And it is not, but there's not a law that says a policy has to be adopted by the school board. You will get audited from the state on your special education policies and making sure that you have everything in place that needs to be in place. So even though there's not a law that says you need to adopt a policy, the auditors are going to come by and they're going to be looking for very specific information. So you want to make sure that you have that covered. And then we have policies that are covered by just the board's local decisions. So a field trip policy, it's not required by law. It's not necessarily going to get the school district into any hot water as far as legal liability, but the board may want to have the authority to approve all overnight field trips and then provide the superintendent the authority to approve other field trips. So what they're doing is they're setting up the expectation for their district. Also, for dating violence, there is not there's a statute on dating violence, a Pennsylvania statute on dating violence, but within that statute, there's not a statement that says there has to be a policy adopted. Some school districts do adopt a policy on dating violence. Other school districts do not adopt a policy on dating violence. There's also guidance that just came out from the state on dating violence. Again, it does not have a policy requirement. So those types of things are local decisions versus where we go back over to the mandated by law and regulation, the bullying policy in that state statute, it specifically says that school entities need to adopt a policy on bullying that policy itself has to be reviewed every 3 years. So they're even putting a requirement on that. And then there's also, we have down there state assessments. There is a law on state assessments that says parents have to have the ability to review the assessment and to opt out of the assessment. So moving on, I just wanted to give you some type of idea that not every policy in your policy manual is going to be mandated, but there are other categories that we put them in. This is what we call the board policy life cycle. And just to give you an idea of the responsibilities between the board governance level and the managerial or the superintendent's responsibilities and the administrative level, I'm sorry. The dotted line across in between that circle that breaks up the circle, that is the distinguishing point between the board governance and the administrative realm. So at the top of the circle, this is all the board's realm. The board is going to identify a need, and they may get that information from their superintendent, who tells them, hey, we're having an issue in the district. Will you take a look at our attendance policy? So the board will take a look at the attendance policy. They'll gather all the appropriate information. They make some revisions to the policy. The policy goes through a board adoption process. And typically, what that means is the administration or the superintendent would give the board some recommended changes to the policy. It goes through a full reading of the board for a first reading. If there are not any significant changes at the first reading, typically goes through a second reading, and then it's adopted at that point in time. So that's what we mean by board policy adoption process. Once the policy is adopted by the board, as you see, the dotted line is right there. That's when the board policies, where the board's realm ends, and it moves into the administrative responsibility. So the policy may say the superintendent shall develop administrative regulations. And so then you have administrative regulations, which are really the details on how the board policy is going to be achieved. And then, so we have the policy in place, we have the administrative regulations in place, and then we listen to feedback. It can be anecdotal feedback from your students, from your counselors. It can be reports and data, and then that information gets fed back into the board. So initially we said we were looking at an attendance policy. Maybe during that data and feedback timeline, we saw that the college attendance was not consistently implemented throughout the district. So maybe some schools were saying it was an excused absence, others said it was not. So the superintendent's responsibility is to provide that information back to the board so that they can make an informed decision as to whether they're going to update the policy again. But the superintendent is the only one that operates on both sides of that dividing line. And moving on, Will.
Hey, Davelyn, we are just about time, and it looks like this is your last slide, so I'll let you take it away.
That's okay. This just gives you a real general overview of policy versus administrative regulations. Again, policy is the board's realm. It should be very high level, broad, and general. It should be applicable over time. So you're going to be referring to your plans, and your code of student conduct and your policies, but you're not going to be rewriting those. And the policy can stand the test of time because when the details change in those specific plans, you're not going to have to go back and change your policy. Policies are always public documents. They're adopted at a public board meeting, and they are equivalent to your locally elected officials, and you are making a decision. So when policy is put in place, it does have to be followed by everyone. So what is required is board policy. Administrative regulations, on the other hand, get much more specific and detailed. When I mentioned the field trip policy, you may have one policy, but 11 administrative regulations that go along with that. That can be your parental permission forms. It can be requirements for how is the field trip tied to the curriculum and so forth. And the detail that goes into these administrative regulations is going to change much more frequently. And they really are directives for the staff. So they're communicated mainly to the staff, and they detail how the board's goals are going to be achieved. So when you're on the school board, one of the best things that you can ask a question when you're going through your board agenda is, what does our board policy say on that? And I think that that's just, if you keep that in your mind, that's a really good place to start. So thank you so much.
Daylin, thank you so much. And any questions? Yes, there are a few in the chat. I want to thank everyone for placing your questions in the chat. I want to apologize for not seeing some of them come through. And I quickly had to let Carmen know, hey, can you stay on to answer some questions? So Carmen's going through any of the legal school law questions in the chat. Daylin, if you don't mind, because we are up against site this presentation, if you don't mind staying on and answering any of the policy questions in the chat. And again, if you wanted to submit a comment or a question, please use the Q&A feature at the top. I will say Andrew left a comment. He said, just a comment. We have 334 policies in my district. I just became the policy committee chair after a director resigned from the board, and it's a lot to learn. Yeah, there's a lot of policies. So again, if you're considering a run for your school board, jump into your policy manual 000 your local board procedures, but again, all those sections that Daylin mentioned as well. Daylin, again, if you don't mind staying on. Carmen, thank you both for staying on and answering the questions in the chat. And now it's the time.
Thank you, Andrew.
Now it's the time for Dr. Saitha Gwines, PSBA's Director of Professional Development, to share a little bit about school finance.
All right. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us tonight. And thank you for taking an interest in serving on your school board. It is an incredibly important role for your students and your community. And it is something that has an enormous impact, not just on the students today, but the students who will walk through your buildings over the coming years and decades. So my area of expertise this evening is school finance. Well, if you want to move us forward, school districts are unique in that some of the language that we have around budgeting and finance sound really similar to our kind of business sector or other nonprofit sectors. The interesting thing, though, is that school districts are a nonprofit that are governed by both federal and state regulations. And so there are lots of kind of intricacies that make school finance and budgeting different than what you might have experienced in your personal and professional lives. So I'm seeing that we're having a little trouble with our PowerPoint. So I'm just going to kind of narrate the first slide that we have here. So this is a pie graph that's meant to show us the average district expenditures for a district. And this is in the 2020-2021 school year. We haven't seen a ton of movement in this information, but still, but much of what we see here is still the same. So the largest piece of this pie that you see in navy blue are our salaries and benefits. That's 60% of average district expenditures are spent in salaries and benefits. Now that's important to note because salaries and benefits are dictated by your collective bargaining agreements and other state and federal mandates. So here, the largest chunk is something that as a newly elected director, you probably won't have a ton of influence on until contract negotiations start. Now, you might be elected right into the middle of a contract negotiation year, and so you might have a little bit more influence, but it's important to note that the largest piece of district expenditures is something that individual directors and teams of 10 often don't have the ability to influence. The next largest piece, which is kind of a baby blue, are our purchase services. So that's our contracting and our contracts or other people that are doing work within the district. And then we have debt service and fund transfers. So that's paying off of our loans. That's the light green. The darker blue are supplies and materials at 4%, and other is 3%. And as a former teacher, I always like to say that supplies and materials make up a very small chunk of the budget. And so when you're thinking about negotiating and trying to make cuts in the budget to match your revenue, changing the paper in your copying machines may seem like something that's going to make a big impact. But overall, because supplies and materials are only 4% of the budget, really the only thing that's going to do is make your teachers really angry when that paper doesn't go through the copying machine the way that it should. And so that's just a really important kind of thing to keep in the back of your brain, that trying to balance a school district budget is challenging because lots of the budget is dictated by things outside of our control. We also have expenditures to outside education agencies. So there's money that we have to spend in our districts that go outside of our walls of our schools. And the first one, the one that's gained a lot of attention over the last few years, are our charter schools expenditures. So in the last fiscal year, $2.6 billion of Pennsylvania district money went to charters. 1 billion and a little bit more went to cyber charters. And our per pupil contribution depends on the previous year's calculations. So I live in the Shippensburg School District. So what Shippensburg pays to charters is determined by last year's calculations. And we can see where that can be a little bit challenging because there's lots of change that happens from year to year in districts, and using a year-old calculation can have a really big impact. On the other side, another outside education agency that districts contribute to are our CTCs and our IUs. And those payments are made before any other expenses. And so again, there are large chunks of the budget that are dictated by things that are outside of the Team of 10's control. If we want to move forward. So those are the things that have money going outside of the district, the money that we're spending. So here, this is what we are collecting as a district, our revenue. And so there are 3 buckets that we have for revenue in districts. We have our local revenue, and that's collected in Pennsylvania through our real estate property taxes. We have our state revenue, which is determined by the legislature every year, and then federal revenue. And so here, if you could picture this as a pie graph, most of our revenue in districts come from a share between local and state. And what's really interesting in Pennsylvania is that there is not a kind of rule of thumb over all districts depend on this percentage of local revenue and all districts receive this % of state revenue. It is a really interesting balance between those two that looks wildly different across districts in the state. Local property taxes that is where you as a team of 10 have the most impact. You as a team of 10, 9 voting members, will decide every year at what rate your local property is taxed. The challenge, however, is that the assessed value of your properties is not determined by the school district. It's determined by your county. And so you have to kind of work in tandem with your county your county government to understand how your local revenue is collected. Well, if you want to go to the next slide, that'd be great. So this slide has some anonymous districts. We have District A through D, and they're a mixture of rural, suburban, and urban districts. And this is just to highlight the point that it doesn't matter where you are in Pennsylvania or what kind of district you are, rural, suburban, or urban, your percentage of local revenue and state revenue varies widely. So for example, we have a rural district at District A, 41% of their local revenue comes from their local real estate taxes, and 54% comes from state revenue. The other rural district is flipped completely. Rural District C has 59% of their revenue determined by their local taxes and 37% from the state. And so that share is determined by your property value, the income of your district, in a pretty complicated formula. When you join the board, it's very important for you to understand this kind of split and how much room you have to balance the budget through raising taxes versus hoping that state revenue matches what you're expecting or what you need. So another piece of budgeting in school districts is our fund balance. This gets a lot of attention every year. And so if you think about your revenues and your expenditures, the fund balance is the accumulated surplus over time if we have a positive difference between our revenue. So we bring more money in than we've spent. That surplus is placed in the fund balance. We can kind of think of it as a savings account, but the rules for it are very different. And so districts accumulate a fund balance over years, and that's there to be used in extenuating circumstances, or if they need to balance the budget, if the balance changes where their revenue is less than their expenditures. And the fund balance is kind of split into two buckets. You have an uncommitted that you can use when you need it, or an assigned. And so here, the assigned is when you know that you have a really big construction project that you've been planning for a number of years, and you need to have a healthy chunk of money to pay for that really big project or to contribute to that really big project. You commit that fund balance money so that it is there when you have to pay the architect, or you need to pay for the renovations to your library. The rule in Pennsylvania is that you can only have 8% of your fund balance unassigned. And so that means that you can't have districts that are constantly accumulating more money in their fund balance while raising taxes, right? While increasing their revenue. And that's to really protect our taxpayers so that we don't have this rainy day fund that districts are never using. Fund balance management is so important because it affects your long-term planning. It affects your credit rating as a district. And we know that, you know, in extenuating circumstances, so a global pandemic, or before COVID, we had a really tough recession period in the early 2000s, that fund balance becomes really important to keep districts moving forward. Really quickly, this is a slide that talks through where fund balances should be spent if we're using best practice. And the rule of thumb is your unassigned fund balance should be for one-time expenses. We should try our best to refrain from dipping into the fund balance year after year to make up the difference, the negative difference between our revenue and expenditures. And we don't want to continue to do that, because if we continue to use our fund balance to balance our budget, that fund balance runs dry. And then when we do need to plan for a future building or have a major equipment replacement, we won't have those funds in place. And finally, we just wanted to include one final thing about the district budget timeline. Much like, as I said before at the beginning, district finance is slightly different than our personal and professional finance kind of approaches. And this is because we are, as school boards, we're overseeing how money is being spent for the current budget, while also thinking about how we plan for the upcoming budget. So it's like you have two overlapping cycles at the same time. And so here, now that we're at the beginning of the calendar year, this is when districts begin with their proposed and preliminary budgets. They start to decide whether or not they are going to raise taxes within the Act 1 index, which is what our state tells us the limit to which districts can raise their taxes in a year. And then they begin talking through that budget, working together as a team until they finally have to adopt it by the June 30th deadline. So that brings us to a close of our finance section. And I will pause here for a minute or so to allow for questions. I see some questions. I want to address a few things. This whole session is not going to address the specific logistical pieces of running for school board. So I see a question about forms and signatures. All of that information is the best place is your county board of election, but also on our How to Run for School Boards page on Great PA Schools is our online course and candidate guide that has more specific information. I will make sure also, I saw somebody ask about the percentages. We can make sure that that graphic is included in the follow-up email for registrants. Are there any?
I'm not sure. I think you hit on all of them. There are some questions on training. So if you want to go into the Q&A and see what you can answer off camera. Thank you for that insightful presentation on school finance. And if you don't mind, like David and Carmen, staying a little bit later to go through the Q&A and see which questions you can answer. But that was a really fast hour. We have about half an hour to go. And at this point, I would welcome Roberta Marcus and Tina Valletto, PSBA consultants and former school board directors, to go ahead and turn on their cameras and unmute their microphones, because now it is time for the experienced director panel discussion. We have 5 questions that we have ready to go for Roberta and Tina, but please don't hesitate if you have any questions, specific questions for those who lived the life of a school board director for many years. Please don't hesitate to put those in the Q&A. But at this point, Roberta and Tina, if you are, oh, there you are. Hey, before we dive into the panel questions, I'll start with you, Roberta. Can you just give everybody a background on your experience in school board service?
Certainly. Thanks, Will, and welcome everyone. I was on my local school board for 20 years, and I also am a past president of the association and currently a strategic consultant for the association. My service with my local school board started even before I was elected by attending meetings and budget seminars and being part of the parent community in order to find out how the district was run or running and what I could do to contribute as a board director.
Thank you, Roberta. Tina, can you tell us about your service?
Hi, thanks, Will. Hello, everyone. And thank you to each and every one of you who's considering a run for school board. I must say, I'm an attorney. I was not involved in education law. I was a business attorney, and yet my experience as a board director was one of the greatest experiences I have ever had professionally, and to be able to give back to my community. I served on my local school board for 8 years. I served under Roberta as a director on the PSBA school board, on the PSBA board. I then became an administrator in an educational intermediate unit, if you know what those are. And if you get elected, or even if you're not elected, you should know what the intermediate units are in Pennsylvania. But so I have unique experience being able to help out with school boards across the Commonwealth, really navigate some of the issues and concerns some of you addressed in the Q&A.
All right, Tina and Roberta, thank you so much for joining. Like I said, we have a few preset questions, but don't hesitate to put your questions in the Q&A feature. I already saw somebody submit one for the panel already, so thank you. Keep them coming. Tina, we're going to stay with you. Question number 1, what are the primary responsibilities that school board directors spend most of their time on, and what are the keys, do's, and don'ts for serving effectively in the role of board director?
Thank you. There was a question about the time commitment and what do you spend your time on? You spend your time obviously attending meetings, but at the same time, if you want to be a truly effective board director, you should be reading the information that's provided to you. Your superintendent and administration will most likely present information preceding any voting meeting or committee meeting so that you have information that you should read. Many of the questions you may have pertaining to those specific voting items may be provided in in the pre-reading that you would have before the meeting. Also getting a sense of what's going on in the community. You are an ambassador for the community. In many ways, you're an ambassador for the school district. So it's incumbent on you to learn what's going on, the programs and services that are available, to understand the budget. So that does take time. You may also be a part of other committees. So whether it be a board committee or serving on another board, such as the Career and Tech School or the Intermediate Unit Boards. So there may be time outside of your day-to-day service on the school board that you may have to spend time at other meetings.
I heard a few, hold on, Tina. I heard a few do's. Do you have any don'ts as a school board director?
Absolutely. So you are not employed by the district. And that's something I had to really get in my head. I was a practicing attorney when I served on my board, and I had to keep reminding myself I was not hired to do the job. My role as a director was to be at a governance level, to follow the things that are required under the legislation as to what you're required to do. But it wasn't my job to be at the school district in any of the buildings on a day-to-day basis, to manage or supervise or any of those things. The relationship truly was with the superintendent, who was the commissioned officer of the district, and as such has the educational background and is employed by the district. That's an important thing to note.
If I may add to that, and Tina hit on all the high points, one of the things you'll learn when you become a school board director is that you have no individual power. You have no individual authority. The only time you have any authority is when you are in a collective legislative, properly, a business meeting of the district, and that your voice and vote counts at that time when you're there with your peers. So one of the don'ts is thinking that you have the ability to change a bus stop, for example, or change the lunch menu, or decide on something on an individual basis. And that can drive sometimes to a bit of frustration. But the greater piece of this is knowing that one of the most important pieces of you being a school director is hiring and evaluating your superintendent. And that's the person who is the day-to-day manager of your district. And that's the most important part of understanding what you do and don't do around school district services and all the things around public education.
Thank you, Roberta. I wrote down when the two of you are speaking, your power and authority as an individual school board director is your voice and vote at school board meetings. That's why, to Tina's point, it's so important to be properly prepared, review the information provided to you by the administration. And also, Tina, while you were speaking, I thought of a quote that's floating out there, that school boards do not run the district. School boards do not run the district. They ensure the district runs well. We delegate much of the executive function to the superintendent, and then we annually assess their performance in managing day-to-day operations. So thank you so much. We do have a lot of questions coming through in the chat. So Steve, hopefully we answered that one about one do and one don't. But Joe has a question. What did you both like most about being on the board? And what did you both like least about being on the board, Roberta?
What I liked most about was being involved in our future, and being involved in the children future, their opportunities, and then enjoying seeing them grow through the programs and services we provided, giving students all the opportunities that they need to be successful in their future life and for their community and their nation. So that was the most thing that gave me. The least was sometimes you don't get what you want. And you have to learn how to compromise, listen to all sides, and come up with for the best decision for the district. Sometimes it's not your own, you're the minority voice, but what's important for the district is to meet the mission and the vision goals that you have, and to feel that that was a challenge that you met and perhaps didn't win that day, but there'll be other challenges you will win.
And as I said, being on the board was so rewarding professionally.
Yeah.
I learned so much. At the same time, I always said to folks, for me, graduation day was my payday. As you may realize, and maybe you don't, if you're running for school board, just know you do not get paid. To me, my pay was graduation day, because that's what you're working toward, and ensuring that children are making their mark in the world and that you're a part of that process. What I didn't like is that when you're talking about children, it becomes very emotional. You're not going to be well liked in some of the decisions that are made, and that's hard for someone who knows a lot of people in the community. It's gut-wrenching when you see things that impact children that you know, families that you know, and to hear friends of yours say they didn't agree with a position you took. So that's uncomfortable. So you have to be willing to have that strong backbone and understand that you're doing what is right for the entire district, not picking and choosing certain segments of the community. And so you're not going to be everyone's friend. And I think that comes with any elected office. So as you contemplate running for school board, just know sometimes you just can't please everyone, and you have to be willing to stand by that.
Thank you. So a few questions in the chat. Steve said, any idea what the average tenure of a school board director is? And I'll take that one because I share it quite often. It's about 50% of school board directors in Pennsylvania serve 1 4-year term. 50% of school board directors serve 1 4-year term. And anytime a director is leaving a board, I always want to find out why. Either, their children graduated from the district and they feel like their job's done, or, that's one of them. Sometimes directors wait until their kids are actually out of the district to then run for board. So everyone kind of does it differently. But often it's the job wasn't what you thought it was. The power and authority isn't what you thought it was. There's a lot of misconceptions about the role of school boards and school directors. And then the dynamics of the board, certain individuals not working as a team. So I said earlier, in Pennsylvania, we use the term team of 10, the 9 school directors and the superintendent working on a team. It's not always rainbows and sunshine. To Roberta's point, you don't always win, but it's, identifying the processes you follow to get the work done, ensuring all voices are heard throughout those processes, coming to consensus that you have enough information to make a decision, you vote your conscience, and then you support the majority decision of the board. And one director said, if you're in the minority, you live to fight another day. But in understanding that that's how you work as a team, and to Roberta's point, not every decision the board made you might personally agree with, but you understand that, you're working as a team, you have processes, voices are heard, everything that I just shared. Okay. We have one here from Sarah. Says, for the panel, could you please describe what Robert's Rules is or are, and what are the pros and cons? What does PSBA prefer? So Robert's Rules is a form of parliamentary procedure. And if you've ever gone to a board meeting, it is quite formal to a degree because they are using parliamentary procedure. But Tina, talk to us about Robert's Rules or what you know about parliamentary procedure.
So that's one of the areas where I say you do your homework. Both Roberta and I were board presidents, so we had to run the meetings in many instances, our legislative meetings. And so we had to have familiarity with our procedures. In my district, we started with Robert's Rules, but then our solicitor had presented a different format, format for parliamentary procedure. So a lot of that is not necessarily prescribed by law. You don't have to use Robert's Rules, but I would say a majority of boards do. But that is the guideline. Even if you're not following specifically Robert's Rules, there are do's and don'ts for running a meeting, making motions, tabling items. So that's something that you will come to understand as you work through it. But remember, you're in the fishbowl. That means, as Carmen mentioned, you're in a public meeting. And so familiarity with process, board function, board procedure really helps when you're in those situations where there may be disagreement. And you'll learn more as you become an elected school board director.
A school board service is a local governing part of what you're going to do is going to be determined by your culture at your local level. And what Tina just referenced is most school districts have what they call board operations policies, which kind of sets in place the way you will perform your duties when you're at a business meeting of the board. But it's really important to understand that the leader of the board is the one with the gavel, is the one person who's going to make sure that civil discourse occurs, that you're following the agenda appropriately, that you're following laws. That's why your solicitor is usually present or advises you, that you're not vulnerable or liable for violating any code or laws that are around school board business. Remember that the General Assembly of Pennsylvania gave school boards a lot of governing authority at the local level. And so you need to follow those kinds of rules, whether it's Robert's rules or any kind of other rules around parliamentary procedure when you are doing the business of the district. So you'll have, once you become a school board director, you'll be in service in order to understand how the business of the district is conducted properly, legally, and appropriately.
Hey, Will, can I answer Joe's question about when you have kids in the school?
Yeah, Tina, I was going to ask, that because our next question kind of has to do with personal consideration. So Joe's asking, have you seen more school board directors prefer to run when their kids are in the district and when they're out of the district? And then we had another question from Steve about being a former teacher and how are former teachers seen as candidates for school board. I can see it going both ways. So we're talking about some of those personal considerations. Can you share with us your experiences in either being a parent on the board or working with former teachers? Tina, take it away.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it was something that I considered deeply as a candidate. I waited. I was a very involved parent, very involved in our PTO, very involved with my children. And I really wanted to make a difference. And I had been asked multiple times to run for board. I personally made the decision based on my work, my employment, as well as time commitment that would be needed to serve on our board, that I wanted to wait until my children were a little bit older. But I also felt strongly that my board should have a balance between those who have those who have children in the school district, as well as those who don't. And so that there was a balance, so that there was information. I know that one of the things that precipitated my decision not to stay on my board and not to seek re-election was after my last child had graduated, and I felt that I looked at our board and I felt that there was no one left that had children in the school district. And I felt very strongly that that voice should be a part of the district. So it was a personal decision for me. You have to balance. Do you have support at home? Because there will be nights when you're out. So if you don't have babysitting capacity, you don't have the ability to spend nights out, and perhaps a Saturday or other meetings, then you may have to seriously consider, do you have the time to commit to that? So that is a personal decision. You're going to really have to, as a parent. You also have to look at, can your children withstand the public scrutiny? Because they do in many ways get pulled in, not willingly and not perhaps purposely, but there are times when they are impacted by decisions that are made. One of the things my children were constantly complaining about was snow days. And it's like the board has nothing to do with that, but somehow their friends thought that we did. So they would get the calls about the snow days. I'll let Roberta answer more on that, but I just wanted to touch on Steve's question regarding being a former teacher. I ran with somebody who was a teacher in another district. I don't think in his case it hindered his ability at all to seek election. And the only thing is that if you are a part of the PSEA, which is the state employees association, that you may be precluded from actual negotiations of the contract. You are permitted to vote on the contract, but you may be precluded from those negotiation discussions because of that conflict of interest. So it all depends. But again, I wouldn't dissuade anybody from running for school board. We desperately need people who are committed to making a difference in our schools and for children. Roberta, did you want to?
Yeah, just to quickly answer, one of the things you're going to have, you will learn is that you wear one hat, and that's the hat of a school board director, wherever you are. Whether you're at parent-teacher night, whether you're at the soccer game, whether you're at the supermarket. And that becomes a challenge for some in terms of you always being at their ready. You are a public servant. And so you need to also understand that it's good to have parents on your board because they know what's happening in the schools and they have a sense of the community firsthand so that you're not hearing it kind of down the alley information. But to Tina's point, I'll give you a very quick anecdote. My young son was at high school when I was on the board, because over a 20-year period, my children were in school, and the principal called him down to the office. And by the time he got down to the office, he thought he was in trouble. No, the principal wanted to give a message to me. Well, we kind of stopped that practice early on. So you need to have a conversation with your family because you can have your family very much involved with the fact that you are a local official and that you make very important decisions, both around taxes, around curriculum, around personnel that will affect the community, and they feel that they have a closeness to you, an empowerment by being your neighbor. So that has to be a real consideration for when you run for the school board.
And Devin, go for it. 18 years old, as long as you are qualified to seek election.
Yeah, 1 year in your district. You have to have lived in your district
1 year in your district. But I know a very successful school director. I watched him grow into his position, and he started out as a senior in the high school when he ran for election, and he did very, very well. And he continues to be in the political realm now at a legislative office. So it really stuck with him. And so I say, if you have the time and the energy, you should go for it.
Absolutely. You want to serve your community, you go for it.
Roberta and Tina, thank you. We have about 5 minutes left, and I had 3 questions in the chat that I wanted you to address, but now it's 2 because Tina's beating me to the chat. But I agree, Devin, go ahead, 18 years old, that, if you meet the qualifications, and really for anyone, is if you have the time commitment, and just make sure you have the right purpose of why you're going on, because we often say, if you want to join a board for a single issue, that's not the right reason to join a school board. There's a lot going on in the school system, and you have to care about all of it and be properly prepared to engage in decision-making at board meetings. So there's a lot to it, but I don't think age is a factor if you are 18. All right, so there's 2 more comments. One, I'm going to tie to our next question. Will probably be the last question of the webinar, but we had one from Ken, and then Amy had a follow-up. So Ken said, for the panel, how do you handle rude constituents that insult you personally during the public comment section of a meeting? And then Amy said, or how do you handle a confrontation out and about in your community? And again, both of these kind of go to some of the misconceptions that our communities have about the role of the board and the role of individual directors, because I know many school directors will be shopping for ice cream deals at the grocery store, and many board directors will be shopping for ice cream deals at the grocery store, and then a community member will come and have a concern and want them to address it, and that's not necessarily our role. And then I know public comment, not everyone's aware that our board meetings are for the board to conduct business with the opportunity for the public to comment. It's not a Q&A with the public, but I know some of those misconceptions lead into some of this tension. So Roberta, talk to us about public comment and as well about being out in the community, because you're always wearing the hat of school director, right, Roberta?
Absolutely. Even though you try not to, it's the one hat you do continue to wear everywhere. You made an excellent point, Will, and I'll just underscore it. One of the first things about a public comment period of your business meeting is not to engage in a discussion. That is not the purpose of the meeting for public comment. They are within their rights to come to the podium, and you've set policy on how that will be handled, whether or not they're a resident or a taxpayer, how much time they'll be allowed, how many minutes you'll allow at the total meeting for both agenda items and non-agenda items, public comment, but it's not a time to engage in a back and forth. The one thing you want to do is not escalate the situation, and people can be very rude and infuriating and kind of poke at you. Try going through a school strike and be at a public meeting during a strike. That can really get rude. But the way you handle yourself is really reflective of the way the district will be perceived. And so it's really more important to keep your cool. Usually in most school board meetings, the president of the board is the one holding the conversation with the person at the podium. It is not an individual back and forth. So it's really important to have a conversation with your superintendent and your board leadership, your president and vice president, to be sure that everyone understands when someone comes to the board to see the meeting and comes to the podium to make a public comment, what the procedure is going to be regarding whatever comment that is. It's always important to try and diffuse it. If there's some misinformation you can do that evening, it should come from the chair or the superintendent. It shouldn't be a back and forth. So I think it's really important to understand that even when you're in the community and you're at the target and somebody comes up to you and says, hey, that you know that you have no individual way of saying to them, I'll take care of that. That's not something any school board director can do. What you can do is offer them the ways for them to contact the principal, contact the superintendent's office, give them opportunities to understand that they're being heard, but you're not there to give them the answer. And sometimes they don't want to deal with that. Just stand firm, don't get distracted, and be able to understand that you're not obligated to give them the answer they're looking for.
And also
Thank
remember
you.
what I said about having a strong backbone. There will be times when things are said to you and you will be accused of things. I can't say that it's going to be, as we say, sunshine, roses every day. There will be decisions that folks are not happy with, and you will get cornered potentially in the supermarket. And you just have to have a strong backbone and treat people with respect, even if they're not being respectful to you. Always keep it at that level and understand that, again, when you're dealing with children, it can be highly emotional. And with those emotions, and when you're talking about taxes, it can be very emotional. And so you have to be willing to withstand the concerns, the criticisms, but make sure that you have the information to make the best decision possible and not listen to anecdotes. There is a question out there regarding conversations with staff. Just keep in mind that it isn't always what you hear. It's based on the facts, and the facts may vary substantially from what the rumors are and what people feel, and how one employee may feel disgruntled. So you have to keep it within perspective, and that's where the relationship with the superintendent is critical, to be able to obtain the facts, the information, to make a very, very informed decision.
Right. When you make these informed decisions, just to couple with that comment from Tina, you need to understand that when you make these decisions, there are short-term and long-term effects of them. So it's when you do your due diligence around a decision and it's provided through data, through research, through the recommendations of the administration. Your decisions are really important. So you need to take that into consideration if you're going to run for the school board, that you need to understand the time that you're going to have to put into this, and that there are other commitments that the district will ask you to do around, I put it in the comments, around participating in committees of the intermediate unit, the career and technical centers, perhaps some community like a library board. You will be asked when you're on your school board to attend those meetings and give extra hours and effort to them. But one of the things you need to really understand when you run for the school board is that this is a collective body of business, that we give board service individually, but we do it as a collective body. And so you need to understand the mechanics of a school board. And if you haven't attended a school board meeting, I would highly suggest that you attend several, that you even consider attending committee meetings if your district has those, so you get a sense of the operations of the district and how they do their administrative work and what the board's involvement is regarding those decisions. You are a decision maker. You are a policy maker. The only person that truly works for the board is the superintendent of schools. And so you need to keep in mind that that relationship with the superintendent and the board is very important. It needs to be trustful, needs to be respectful, and that you have an obligation to show up to a board meeting or any meeting of the board or as a representative of the board, well-informed and ready to make a decision. Your voice is your vote.
And that's an important point. Just as you're contemplating running or as you begin the running for election, attendance at board meetings is critical, so that you understand the issues and concerns that are being addressed and that you've done your homework. And going to a committee meeting where a lot of the nuts and bolts of the district are being discussed is very helpful. I attended every meeting prior to being elected, so that once I took the seat, even though I still needed to learn a lot, I knew a lot of what was going on because I was there at those meetings beforehand. So I knew a lot of the issues that were happening.
All right. Well, Tina and Roberta, that is our time. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join this webinar and engage in that panel discussion. I want to also thank Carmen, Scythe, and Davelin for taking time to share in their content areas. If you haven't been to greatpaschools.com, the How to Run for School Board webpage, that's where registration for this webinar was housed. We also have a hard copy PDF you can print with additional information, as well as an online course. So we took some time and consideration in developing these materials for board candidates. So we hope that you take the time to review them. And then again, if you want to start the process, you would start with your county board of elections. But at this point, everyone, that is our board candidate webinar. We will be placing a recording of this on the website, and we will be sending a follow-up either tomorrow or Friday with a bunch of information regarding school board and school board directors. So on behalf of everyone at the Pennsylvania School Boards Association, thank you for your interest in running for your local school board. Thank you for joining this webinar, and everyone have a great rest of your night.